All right. Well, hey, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Heromakers Podcast. And Ann, like we talked about last night, the sun is shining here and the birds are chirping. And it's supposed to be, Ann, get this, Ann, 60 next week.
That's awesome.
Chicago. 60.
Is that good?
Yes. That's
okay.
Amazing. So we went from like 1 month ago when it was like -10 to like now, which is 60, which is amazing.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And I have to tell you, I was talking to somebody in Toronto yesterday in your neck of the woods. I was, and we're actually partnering with them. They have a podcast called We As, and their podcast, and they talk to difference makers. And I didn't realize he was in Toronto, and I was like, oh, I know, Ann's in Toronto. So we were talking about how great Toronto was, but
You gotta come up. You gotta come up to Toronto.
Once you open your border, I will be up there for sure, because it's been too long. Yeah. So, Ann, I am really intrigued by the conversation that we are going to have today. And we're going to talk with Darcy Olsen, who started, founder and CEO of this great organization called Gen Justice, which, Darcy, I did kind of like a deeper dive into your organization over the past like 2 or 3 weeks when I knew we were going to talk. And I was like, how did I not know that your organization existed? Because you're doing such great work. And up here, Darcy, I don't know if they're down there, but we have something called Safe Families up here in the Chicago area. And Darcy, you're working to just help give voices to children who are in the foster system and to make us aware of some of the injustices that are happening to children who are trapped in foster care. And I think that is an amazing, amazing mission. So welcome to the podcast, Darcy.
Thank you, Laurie and Ann. It's so nice to be on with you guys.
This is great. I love talking about kids. Before the podcast, we were talking about, we have kids of a similar age, kind of that just below 10 bracket. And Darcy, I tell you guys, Darcy has fostered 10 kids. You've fostered 10 kids. And right now you have 4, right? You're an adopted mom of 4. Mm-hmm. And that's a lot. That's a lot of children going through your house. So we're just gonna have to talk about what it's like to have 10 children going through your house.
Great.
But Darcy, why don't you start off by telling our listeners about yourself, where you grew up, and then kind of where did this passion for kind of helping voices on the margins, where did that come from?
Sure. Well, I grew up just like a lot of kids in the 70s with divorced parents and going a little bit here for summers and there, for the school year, and moved between Florida and upstate New York and Vermont, where I was born, and Utah. Traveled a bit with that situation. And, but despite that, I think I was able to, I guess, take the best of that travel and movement as a child. And, you learn pretty quickly that people are the same wherever you go, and you have to build your community where you are. And that's kind of the upbringing. And, when everybody else was reading the Sunday Funnies, I was reading the op-ed pages. I've always been a little bit nerdy that way, and always had a strong sense of justice. And I think when you put 2 and 2 together, what you can actually do in your community and what needs to be resolved and where you can help, it just kind of came together to form Gen Justice.
Okay. And then, so what was your trajectory then, like as you went through schooling and kind of pursued this interest in justice?
Well, I was really lucky to get a scholarship to college, and I went to Georgetown. So that opened up a whole world of the way we make change and our history and rights that people had at the founding of the country and rights that some people didn't have at the founding of our country. And many of those things that since that time have been remedied. We've had the suffrage movement, and we've had the civil rights movement, and those are ongoing. Not to say any of these things are completed, but we've made great strides. And the give me the acronym here.
The LGBT, yeah.
Thank you. The community also, they are great strides vindicating constitutional rights. And one of the areas where we haven't done that so well is with children. So all of us know about the problems that kids in foster care have, that they've been hurt at home, that it's so bad that they actually have to be removed to safety. They need temporary families, and sometimes that they're going to need a new forever family if what's happened at home is not something that can be repaired. And we all know that, but what we did, I think people were not aware of, and what I was not aware of, is that one of the reasons it's so tough for these little ones once they get in the system is they don't have attorneys, and they don't have normal due process rights, and they don't have any of the rights and protections that we think of that we give to the criminally accused. And so, that is one of the big areas that we're looking at, which is how to breathe life into their constitutional life and liberty interests in a way that will protect them, not just quickly, but with a safe family, but forever, and then for generations to come. So it's really about pioneering children's liberty interests.
So I'm going to tell you a story, Darcy, is that when I first started to think about the voicelessness of children, and I'm part of a local anti-human trafficking ministry here in the Chicago area. And part of that is just, I get news updates from different parts of the world. And there was one years ago where there was a woman who was in a brothel, and there was a little girl. She had a little girl in the brothel, and this girl grew up, and she was tied to a pole. And she was my daughter's age. And so I would get kind of these news updates on how this, the group that was working there, they were, engaging with the women who were there, and, trying to kind of deal with a huge systemic issues going on. But I just remember thinking of this girl and praying for her, because I thought, here she is, she's 1, 2, 3, 4, at the age of 5 is when she was finally found freedom. And I thought, here's this girl, and nobody was hearing her voice. And so I've always had her face in my mind when I think about children and giving them voices. And so I'm wondering, like, if you have like specific stories or something that was really kind of launched your need to speak into this issue of giving voice to children. Do you have that kind of moment?
I probably have too many stories, like terrible story you just told about that little girl and what was happening to her. The vast majority of kids who are trafficked and end up in situations like the mom in that case actually come out of foster care. That's where they find their victims and take them. So that's very, very dear to me as well. So I think the story that I would tell is about one of the infants that we took care of in our home. So like many of the infants going into the system, they're in there because of really heavy drug use on the part of the birth moms. So many of them struggle when they're first born. Some don't make it, some aren't born. And then when they are born, they're really underweight and they're in the NICU for a really long time. And we had this tiny baby come home, and it was the smallest baby I'd ever seen. He was just over 4 pounds, and he'd been in the NICU for several weeks. And my children, same age, as you were saying, about same age as yours, said, "Oh my gosh, like we don't have to get clothes because we can just use our doll clothes for him." And and their sweetness, but just really tiny. And so I think we know that their lives have been in danger. And as we go through this healing process as foster parents, and we are loving on them, and we're praying for them, we're taking them to the doctor. I mean, if there's something we think we can do, we are doing it. I think I knew about that. I knew that was going to be there, and I was prepared for that. But what I wasn't prepared for is to realize that the next time this infant's life would be in danger would be in the U.S. courtroom. Right? That we think of the courtroom as a place for justice, for protection, especially for an abandoned, abused baby who almost hasn't made it. And you go into that courtroom and you realize there is no attorney for this child. The only person in there is you as the foster parent, if you're lucky. I actually had a judge come visit here, our children's clinic last week, and he said, you know, the big challenge with our system right now is the child is a bit player. And
what does that mean? What
it means is, instead of the starring role, which is what you would think, right? Here's a child who's been abused, you know, all eyes on the child, their recovery, their safe placement and adoption if needed, all the resources, right? You think the wraparound will be on healing this child. It isn't. It has nothing to do with the child, and it has everything to do at this point with trying to remedy the parental behavior that caused the situation in the first place. There's nothing wrong with that. That's wonderful. And I think the wrap around the entire family is a great concept, but the child's way down here. It's not like they're both getting helped. And so, you know, we went into the courtroom and I realized that without those protections, without some similar constitutional protections for the child, that his life was going to be at risk. And we were ordered to send the baby back to a placement that we were confident was not going to be safe. And the reason is that it was a family member where the birth mother was still, and there had already been a child death and 2 other kids had been removed. And within 24 hours of placing him back in that setting, he passed away.
Wow.
This is the story of too many foster parents, grandparents, kin, relatives who have been loving and safely caring for children, who are put back into situations that are not safe. You know, we need, for instance, red flag laws. If you've got meth in the home, I don't care if there's a cop in the home. Like, it doesn't matter if there are emergency personnel in the home. If there is meth use by a primary caregiver and an infant, those 2 things have to be kept apart. You know, it's like, you know, so it's almost like putting a baby in the middle of a highway and just praying they're gonna make it. And they might, but they probably won't. And it's a little like the drunk driving laws. We have those, you know, you can use drugs and you can drink, but you can't get behind a wheel, and you can't be in charge of an infant who needs to eat every 2 hours and be cared for when you're not in your right mind. And so, you know, I share that story to show some of the ways that these laws need to be modernized to catch up and to really be life protecting. They're very common sense. All of the reforms we've passed have been bipartisan. It's not that people don't want these reforms. It's that people don't know. They don't know that children are going back into drug homes, and we're calling them safe because there might be an aunt who can check in every 3 days. So we've, you know, across country, we've seen, you know, infants have died in washing machines and been buried alive and been left on swing sets. And we had a 6-week-old raped by her father who was on meth, and horrible things. And I don't want to bring people down. It's just the extent of the problem is great. And that's why we exist. And that's why we're here. And there is hope because we know what to do, and we are introducing the laws to legislators. And despite all the rancor and the partisanship that there has been in the country, this is an area where people are eye to eye. No one thinks this is okay. So the laws are moving, and that's the good news. So I hope that people walk away with a message of hope, and that there is something that you can do to help mend this system and end the violence against these little ones.
Yeah, I mean, thank you, first of all, for existing. And thanks for all of the work that you're doing, because you're in the thick of it, you know, and it's personal too, because you know these little babies and little children. So, but the question is obviously, like, why haven't the protections, like, what are the obstacles? Because it feels like a no-brainer, you know what I mean? If we're all on the same page, then we should be moving forward. We should have already, hopefully, you know what I mean? Like, ideally it would have been set up. So what are the obstacles that you see?
Well, I think the big obstacle is that people in child welfare, you know, they didn't know. And the problems are so overwhelming. It's like a triage, right? Or an ER room. And all of the people involved in child welfare, these are urgent, imminent danger situations. And so it's like all hands on deck. And I think that for much of the history, people were so busy sort of treating the patients that they weren't able to step back and look at the research on what maybe the best practices were, or look at what might be causing some of the underlying issues. And that's what we're able to bring to the child welfare community. And since we've been sharing these ideas, I mean, we've had ideas go through in Arizona, Georgia. There's another mom there who was a foster and adoptive mom, and she heard about this work, and then she ran this similar legislation there that went through with flying colors. It's been introduced in Florida. The Trump administration signed a federal executive order to help put more funds into the legal arena for these families and kids. So I do feel like when these ideas are introduced, they are being voted up, and the scoreboard lights up and it goes green. And it's just, we're only 3 years old. So we've worked in 2 states, and we just have to work, I guess, smarter, faster, and get the electronics going, and really just reach out. So anyone listening who's interested in moving reforms can reach out. And that's how this happens. It's just one step at a time. And we don't get daunted by that big picture or overwhelmed. We keep making the steps we can make, and next year we'll make more, and the year after we'll make more. And the more kids we row to safety, the better. And someday there will be a life preserver or a ship that's big enough and works well enough to protect all of them. And that's really the goal.
That's amazing. Darcy, I want to go back in time a little bit.
Okay.
Because what I was reading about you is that before Gen Justice, you had written a book called The Right to Try, right? And so you were advocating, and I think this was in like your former work life too, where you were advocating for people who have terminal illness to get the care that they need. Is that correct? Is that correct?
Yes. That's a book I wrote, I guess it's about, I want to say 5 or 6 years ago now.
Okay.
And we were working across the states, and eventually got a federal law that said that anyone with a terminal illness who has exhausted the standard therapies can take something that's investigational in trying to save their lives. And what we reasoned was that if the states have approved the right, you have the right to die and take your own life, that surely they would say you have the right to try to fight and save your life. And it was true. And people, again, the bipartisanship for this was tremendous. It's similar to foster care and adoption. Everybody has known someone with a terminal illness, or known an abused kid, or took in the neighbor kid. And so when you have that kind of personal experience, and someone comes to you and says, hey, what do you think about this idea? People are so receptive. And so we just met people where they were. We would ask them personally, and then we'd say, well, this is how this fits in, and this is what it is. And so we definitely have had people get treated under that, and lives saved with those experimental treatments. Some of you call them experimental, but sometimes they're approved in other countries, but they're just not approved here yet. Yeah. So it just let people, with some of these terrible illnesses, have a fighting chance at life. And I feel like this is another one of those areas that we're trying to give these kids a chance to live, to survive the trauma, and to live another day, and to come out stronger. And they, like folks with terminal illnesses, they may not have a lot, at that point there's limited time and limited energy. And with these kids, they too need someone to help be their voice. Obviously, they can't form a coalition and do this on their own. We really do have to be that voice, and we need to get in there for them and fight.
Yeah.
And I love doing it. And for me personally, I thank God every day that I'm in a position to be able to help more than just the little ones who came home to me.
Yeah.
So I'm glad we can do this.
Well, and you know what this is reminding me of, Darcy, I'm thinking about like all of us, and I would venture to say that there's probably nobody listening to this podcast who doesn't know of somebody in a situation that they wish was different. Like, right. I mean, even as we watch people get older, or, you know, as we watch children who are just struggling with maybe being bullied in school or whatever, like there's this sense of, you know, kind of helplessness. Like how can I make this situation better? And the way that you have gone about this is through kind of fighting it on a legal, kind of a big macro picture. I know you're doing micro things, and I want to make sure we talk about those too. I mean, you personally, you're doing on micro because you've adopted these children, but you're also doing a lot
of peanut butter sandwiches.
Right. So that's my question, is that, you know, for people who haven't gone to Georgetown, who don't have a background in law, or, you know, can stand up in court and all this, I mean, do we stand out and do we picket? What are some of the options that we can do to feel a little bit less helpless when we want to care for people who aren't being heard or aren't being seen?
Well, I think everybody has this question. I'm so glad that you asked it. There's a great deal that we can do. Obviously, I am a fan of working with organizations that are effective, right? So organizations like mine exist because we know how to lobby, we know how to change the laws, we know how to help kids in their court cases. So if you support an organization like that, you're having all of this effect, right? So organizations that are effective are a great place to go, because they are organized and they work all of the pieces. But there's a lot you can also do directly. If it's about changing laws, obviously you can reach out to your own representatives and senators and express your opinion on whatever the issue. But again, if you're in a larger group, it's going to be more impactful. But I think, you know, there are plenty of organizations that do change. You can support legislators who are into change. You can be someone who runs for office, and that can be the school board, that can be a PTA, any kind of office, because again, there you have an organizational and sort of a specific impact that's maybe a little bit bigger, and maybe your skill set is leading a team or helping bring consensus together. So maybe you're great on the city council, listening to the neighbors. But there are, you know, some of the things that I think we do. I think of the literally millions of generous and kind acts that we do one to another every single day across the world. You know, it's the brownies that you drop off at the neighbor who's getting chemo, right? It's we've got a couple neighborhood kids right now who they're not in abusive homes, but they've got some struggles in their homes. And so, I mean, I am exhausted at the end of the day. My 4 kids are there, and I leave the front door open, and I'm feeding. I will have 6 or 7 kids at my house for 2 hours because they need the cheer and the joy and the meal and the love. And so, and that's nothing, right? People do these things, like I said, we don't even know. And when you see a need, all you have to do really is say, is there something I can do? Can I extend myself a little bit in this moment? And I think we can't even calculate the good that is done just through those things we don't even realize we're doing.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I think Ann and I would agree 100%. It's all those little things that are compounded on top of each other. And if everybody's doing that, then we have, you know, millions and billions of people who are just working tirelessly for good. So, okay. So Darcy, let's hop back to the beginning of Gen Justice. So tell us how, you know, your vision came, and just kind of the early days of the organization.
Oh my goodness. Where do we begin on that? Well, of course it goes way back to when I first started fostering, and it's only in hindsight where you really can see the beginning, but those were the seeds. I think the pivotal moment where I knew that really specific work was going to have to be done, and I was either going to do it where I was or I was going to start something new, but I was committed to it, was I was in the courtroom, again, hundreds of hearings for my foster babies over time. And in one of the hearings, it was termination of parental rights of a baby who had been abused and then abandoned. And I think anybody would look at and say, this infant is lucky to be here, be alive, and is going to be in a good home. And the judge said, though, to set the stage for the hearing, he said, I'd like to remind everyone in the courtroom as we proceed today that birth moms' rights are constitutional and babies are only statutory. And boy, did my heart sink. I mean, that took me back to, when you look at women's rights, or you look at slavery, or any of these civil rights that we've had to fight for. And as Americans, we know what it means to be protected by the Constitution and what it means when you're not.
Can you explain the differences for those who don't understand the difference?
Good question.
Yeah. So for instance, under the U.S. Constitution, the criminally accused always have the right to an attorney, and it's paid for by the state. These abused children, being victims of crimes and too young as well to speak in their own defense, do not have that same constitutional right. And you can go down the list. For comparison, like the criminally accused, they have a right to a speedy hearing and a public hearing. Kids in care, I know a kid who spent 15 years, his whole life in the system. The time limits that are there, they're paper tigers. They don't really mean anything. Constitutional rights, they mean something, right? The right to free speech, it means something in this country. So these children don't have that. So under the law, you can do things to your children that you couldn't do to a stranger in the street. No one thinks it's okay. It's just an area of law that hasn't been modernized, and it's based on an assumption that your parents love you and want what's best for you. And thank heavens, 99.99% of parents are those people. But in the instances when you don't have that, and when your own parent is a perpetrator or a predator, you need rights to be able to live and to survive, and to get into a family that with relatives who will take care of you.
Thanks for explaining that. And I think it's really obvious that you that's not just a theoretical, it's not just a policy, it's not just a law, but it's like you really do care. And so I actually just want to ask, and I hope it's okay to ask, like, how do you manage, and how do you make this a sustainable thing? And as well, how do you manage? Can I ask that?
It's a great question. So I'm a single mom too. I mean, keep your eyes open for me, because that's what every guy wants. Like, we're a party of 5, so be ready. So I've got the 4 that I adopted and did foster 10 and did it by myself, but really didn't do it by myself. I have a sister and a brother-in-law and a little bit of family around. I have incredible neighbors who are always keeping watch for the kids who might sneak over the border in the grass with their truck, or just, I think it's really important to do this with a community around you, and not just for the physical, like the demands of how are you going to be at 2 doctor's appointments or whatever, but emotionally too, because it's a tough situation when you don't know how long a child is going to stay. We had a memorial service for our baby, and I had to explain to my kids as best I could why this baby while we were having a service. So getting emotional support from people. And then honestly, I'm kind of what you hope to be by the time you're 80. I don't spend a lot of time getting ready anymore. I'm ruthlessly efficient. I just do what needs to be done. And I have to speak, I get to the point and I just move on. And then I spend my extra energy on my kiddos. When they're out of school, I'm right there. And then I always say this too, and whether you're a person of traditional faith or maybe you're more like my yoginis in my yoga classes, you have light. I think when you're doing good things, you have the wind at your back, and I feel like God has taken some things that could be mountains and made them a little bit easier to climb. And I'm always very grateful for that.
So what stands out to me, Darcy, is it sounds like you have a really good sense of your priorities. And I love how you're like, it's almost like, hey, I'm 80. Like, you're proud of the fact that you're like, it's in this smaller span of time, I've somehow amassed these different life lessons we all need to be
very
learning.
liberating. It's very liberating.
Oh man, I know. Well, it sounds like it. So maybe if you could just give me some of that, like, that would be great. But I think, okay, this is my theory, Darcy, is that when we deal with really rough issues and really difficult issues, it kind of forces us into a place where we do assess what's important, what's not important. How am I managing my time? Am I living in such a way I won't have regrets? Like it sounds too like you're very much other-centered. And I think, and so my theory is that sometimes embracing difficult isn't something we should run from, because it actually helps us to become the kind of people who will, like you were saying, who we are the parents people can drop their kids off, or their kids can run over to, whatever. We bake bread. And so what is the link in your mind between all of the difficulties that you've seen and just the way that you've prioritized your own values and your own life? Do you see a connection there?
Say that again, the question part.
Yeah, so
I was so interested in what you're listening to. I was like, life coaching.
Okay, so I'm life coaching. Oh, that's another hour. But okay, so here's what I'm thinking of. I'm thinking of the person right now who is just going through a lot of difficult things right now. And you kind of want to run away, right? What is it? Why do sometimes we need to press into those instead? Why is that important for our own best living, our own way of seeing the world and growing ourselves and our values? Why do we need to not run away when we're faced with difficult things?
Well, for a lot of the folks out there who are facing difficulties, we can't run, right? I mean, there's only one way forward, and it's through it.
Through it, yeah.
And you can fight the current or you can go with it. And so I think the grace of getting through a situation that's really hard is then you have the hindsight, and it puts you in a position at some point to help someone else, right? So I know kids who grew up in foster care who now can help other kids who are really struggling with the fact that they were abandoned or sexually abused for so many years. Or, when you've lost a child, it goes without saying that no one wants to go through that. But if there is a light, it's at the end, because once you have grieved a child, you are in a really special place to help someone else who's going to go through that at some point in time. So to me, getting to the other side gets you in a position to help pull someone else through. And if you're going through, you got to get through, and then you can take other people, and it helps. I think it can help heal, and just by knowing that you're not alone. And that's what I would say is, one day that the trials that you face now may be of service to you or someone that you love, and you can honor, also, I think you can honor people you've lost that way. So we go through that too, right? We go through the loss of a child or a friend or a spouse or whatever it may be. And in the life you live after that, you can bring honor to their memory. And I think that some of grief is with you, trials are with you. You don't really escape them, but you can go on to have great joy, and even to use some of those experiences to help someone else's be less difficult.
Yeah. I once heard somebody say, and I don't remember who, and so I'm just not even going to try to remember, but I heard somebody say that like what connects us to each other are edges. Like when they're smooth, we won't really connect with other people. But when we have these rough edges, then they create this pattern where we can connect with other people. And I think that's a little bit what you're saying, right? Is when we have like these broken spaces that we have to go through, that somehow will connect us with other people's broken spaces. Like that's the image that I'm getting. But okay, so Darcy, I don't want to run out of time because I want to talk about Gen Justice. So you were in the courtroom and there's this baby, because we got totally off conversation here. And there was this baby, and okay, so continue. Tell us, just about the early days of Gen Justice, and then like what you do, like what do you actually do in terms of micro, macro change?
Okay, so by background, I knew a lot about public policy changes and how to change laws. So that was really helpful in knowing what kind of shape I wanted the organization to take. And I decided there were 3 areas we needed to work in. You don't want all your eggs in one basket. You see politics these days, and we know that's the case, right? So, but also because different elements of society work together. So on a micro level, we take kids' cases, we are their attorneys. And that lets us see what's happening on a day-to-day level and really be in the nitty-gritty. And also just to do that work is so incredibly rewarding. On a macro level, we're changing the laws. So for instance, we're trying to get it so that kids have attorneys, right? So we don't have to be in the courtroom all the time. And we'd like to see that in all of the states. So we're changing the laws to get kids into families faster and to make life safer, to find relatives sooner, all kinds of changes to make the system better. And on a super macro level, that will be vindicating the big constitutional rights, the right a child has to a safe family, to association, to not be trapped in a system for 5 years. Normally you'd call that cruel and unusual punishment, but right in the criminal arena, but here in the foster care world, it's normal. So we just have to modernize and update the law a bit. So those are sort of the umbrella reforms. And so in terms of the concrete, I wrote a vision statement, what I wanted to accomplish, how I thought we could accomplish it. And I took it to some people who had 2 things. One, resources, but even more important than resources is 2, a shared commitment to kids. And said, can you help? And they did. But even with that, the first 6 months we were all volunteers, and we had legislation passed before we had paid employees. So that was what all of us out there can do, which is to call in your favors, call in the people you know, beg, borrow, and steal for a cause. And that's what we did, and it worked. And I'm so thankful to the volunteer lobbyists, to the people who testified. We had foster parents come, and we had older kids. I mean, everybody to help these kids. So you can do a lot with volunteers, for sure, but we also wanted to be a permanent voice for kids. We don't ever want to see them falling through the cracks. So we might solve one problem today and see another one tomorrow. I wanted to make sure there would be an organization here for the day I'm gone. And so that's why it took this shape.
So what you're saying is that if you build it, they will come.
Kevin Costner, come
right?
and join us. Yes.
I'm so glad. I just wanted to actually kind of highlight the fact that you said you're doing this as a single person, And I just want to shout out all of my single women friends too, because also all since I was growing up, I was thinking, man, I think I'm just gonna adopt. Even when I was in university and high school. So I'm like, you know what? There's all these little babies who are children who need families. But now that it's actually, as I'm getting older, I think it's more serious. And I have talked to other friends of mine who have adopted foster kids too, and as single women. So can you just say something to single people who are listening about like, what is it like as a single person, and do you recommend it?
And I am so glad you asked that question, because prior to fostering, if you had asked me if I would adopt as a single person, I would have said, no way. Like, a kid needs two parents. I can't do that. I have a career. How am I gonna work and be home? Right. I mean, all the things.
Yep.
I didn't know that half of these kids go up for adoption. And I was going to take in a teenager. I ended up with a baby. The baby stayed. The baby was abandoned. And suddenly I go from a lady at church helping care for the baby, because I didn't know how long it would be, to needing a nanny and readjusting my schedule and everything else. And I'll tell you what a social worker told me, because the second baby came the same way. And I said the same question I had said the first time. Well, don't you have like married couples who can like do this better? And what she said was true. First of all, we have kids sleeping in shelters, so know that. And second of all, she said, I know the future this child will have in your family. So we would be grateful if you would take in this child. So I know we like to think of these ideal situations, but they don't exist. And all my friends who are married will tell you it looks great from the outside, but they have their problems too. So all the single ladies, you know what? If this is on your heart to love a child, go out there and get it done. And you know what I tell my mom? Look, I have all the time in the world now to get a husband. I've got my kids, and it's wonderful, right? So I've got them, and you can keep looking for the man of your dreams, and that's wonderful, and continue to do that. But if you've got that impression, I'm telling you, there are 125,000 kids on the US wait list. I'm not sure what Canada is like. There are kids in need all over this world, and please don't second guess yourself just because you're one person, because you know what? You are one person, and that's what these kids need. They just need one to love them.
Well, thanks. Also, my mom would be super happy for more grandbabies.
Yes.
Well, and we're going to have to keep having this conversation, because I just think you would be amazing at that.
Yeah, Ann, we'll take that offline, and I will do anything I can to help you.
Oh, I love it. Thanks. I love it. So Darcy, what have you learned from your children that you fostered, and now your 4 children that you've adopted? What are the greatest, what have they taught you about life and hope?
Oh, so many things. One I would say is that I always thought that when people had newborns that they were weepy because it was biological, like hormonal. Telling you, you bring those babies in and you are just as weepy and emotional, and you have all of the mothering instincts there. Mm-hmm. Those come from your heart, and that really surprised me. Mm-hmm. Not that I would love the children, but just the ferocity and the immediacy of it, that I always thought was more like a byproduct of giving birth. That also happens in adopting. Another thing too that my kids have taught me is it's really important in life that we take responsibility for ourselves and not play the victim card our whole lives. So my kids have been drug exposed, some of them, abandoned. A couple of them have situations of their parents that you would never want anyone to know and that they will never know. And they have some challenges as a result, right? A couple of them have special education needs and so forth. And I tell them, yeah, it's too bad. I wish it weren't that way. But one, be grateful you were born, because it is a choice in this country, and a lot of children are not born. So number one, you were born. And number two, everyone's got problems in this world. You know what yours are. And you have a family that's here to help you resolve them. So when you're 18, you're going out there like any other kid, and you're going to crush it. And I think that that's a lesson for all of us. There's a lot of there's a little, in my estimation, we don't want to dwell too much in poor me. Like, poor me is a place to visit, to understand, to work through and move on. Poor me cannot be the reason that we don't take responsibility for ourselves, make good choices, or become good people to other people. And I've had to teach that to my kids. It's not easy for them, especially with drug exposure. Your brain isn't the same. And I'm like, but you still will be responsible for yourself, and we will find workarounds, and you may work a little bit harder, but it's critical, right? We all have to do that. And I tell them at the end of the day, if you care for yourself, you'll be able to help care for each other and other people. Mm-hmm. So I've learned that, because I wanted to baby them and shelter them, and my heart still breaks for those shortcomings, but I do them no favors by letting that hold them back.
Yeah. Well, and what's buried inside of there, I hear, Darcy, is that they need to give their gifts to the world. Like, that it's important that they're here. And I want all of our listeners to take this away, because I want all of us to be strong community support systems for those around us. Like, that's what you're talking about, is you are speaking life into these kids and saying, you know what, understood, it hasn't been great, but you need to keep going. The world needs you, and I'm going to be there. I'm going to cheerlead you on. I'm going to help you say, you know, by the time you're 18, you're going to crush it, whatever it's going to be. And I would challenge all of our listeners today to just look around and say, how am I being a strong support structure to those people around me? How can I be a better support to people around me? What does that look like? So I think those are really great takeaways, Darcy. And where can we find you online and on social media?
We're at Gen Justice. It's for generations. So it's genjustice.org, genjustice.org.
Okay. And are you on social too? Are you on Instagram?
Oh yeah, we're on social and LinkedIn, and okay. We're easy to find. Just type Darcy and foster kids and you probably find it.
Okay, good. All right. And we'll include those in our show notes as well. But Darcy, this has been a joy, and I've just learned so much from you, and keep going. You're just doing great work down there, and we are cheering you on big time.
What a treat. Your show is such a treat, and I appreciate your inviting me on, and nothing makes me happier than when I hear about someone wanting to take in these kids. So I'm truly anytime happy to talk to you about highs and lows, and however I can be helpful to you. And just thank you for the work that you're doing to brighten, to lighten and lighten the load and brighten the day for people.
Yeah. Well, and now Ann has a whole community of people who are going to hold her accountable.
Well, and also other single friends of mine who are interested. So it's not just me.
It's good. Yeah. It's good. Well, thanks, Darcy. And thanks, you guys, for listening to another episode of the Heromakers Podcast. We hope you loved this, and share it with other people who you think would enjoy it. And just consider, what does it look like to support other people? What does it look like to help the kids without a voice? Hop on Darcy's website and let's go change the world, you guys. All right. And we'll see you guys next time.